Hello. Hiya. Welcome everyone, and welcome to this latest class in the A Star series. So today, what we are going to do, we are going to focus on question three of the A Star exam. We are can have a little bit of a look at language techniques in general, and then also have a look specifically at the question as well. Just to say before I start, I just want to apologize to any of you if you were planning to attend last week on the Tuesday. I had to do quite a late cancellation when I realized I made a bit of a calculation mishap with an international flight I was going to catch that day. So it was only on the Monday I cancelled, and though head office were wow, I'm not sure if they'd updated it on the website. So apologies if anyone was expecting that class. To say we will have an additional class to make up the one we've missed will be next week, so Friday the 9th of August. So next week we'll have the usual class, but we are going to have two classes. We'll have one on Thursday the 8th at 8:30, but also on Friday the 9th. Just to say it as well, as always, this is it's been recorded, and how it will work as always, I'm going to share on my screen as I go through, but if any of you have any questions at any point, yeah, please don't hesitate to ask. You can either put it in the messages, or it's no problem to yeah, briefly put your microphone on as well. If you can focus questions on sort of the question number three, the majority, if there's time at the end, then we can do some general general questions then at the end of a class. And just to say, in regards to recording and the resources as well, you can find all of them on the A Star sites. You can find the links to our recordings, but you can also find the documents we have been using and will continue to use within within this lesson. I'm going to share just in the chat as well. I'm just going to share the sources. I shared them last class, but I'll share them everyone, because when we get to the exam later on, we're going to continue using an adapted version of the summer 2019, or it might be November 2019. I'm not quite sure which version of a GCSE. It's an adapted GCSE, so that it's fully in the A star format. Okay, but as said, today we're moving on to question three, and basically question three is the first question in the exam where you'll be asked about the how the writer uses language, how they use techniques. But this will be 4 questions, 3 to 5. In 4 and 5, it's also going to ask how the writers convey their message, which again is going to be sort of method, techniques, tone, structure, all of these sort of areas as well. And equally, when we get to part B of the exam, when you do your question 6 and you're doing your longer form writing, you want to be incorporating your own language techniques as well. Now, when you're asked to focus on language in the exam, the mark scheme can focus on any of these specific areas. So it can be on individual words. You can get a lot from this. Focus on what's an adverb, but more importantly, using words that mean the same thing, using synonyms to build up meaning from it. You can focus on features and techniques, areas like similes and metaphors. You could also focus on sentence forms, writing shorter or longer sentences. Is the language maybe more factual style? Is it more figurative, more descriptive? Whatever it is, it's quite wide what you can focus on. And actually, as we get further on, and it focuses on how the writers convey that message, you can go further than this, focusing on our sort of tone of a piece, possibly tenses, and even a structure, how the piece of writing is put together, because often that's going to tell us a lot about a writer's message. Now, with English, there are many language techniques, but depending on your level and your expertise, you may barely know any, or you may know lots and lots. If you know loads, that's brilliant. Language techniques go far beyond what we're going to look at in this class, and as long as it's a real technique, as long as you can describe it, and as long as, most importantly, you can analyze what an author is achieving with it, then yeah, the more sophisticated your techniques, the better you can do. However, obviously this course we're focusing on trying to pass the exam, trying to get grade 4 and above, so that most of you can go on and do your PGCE. And it is better to do this, if you're not an expert on techniques, to try and learn a few techniques very well and try to make yourself confident on a few key types of words you can recognize when it's an adjective or an adverb or things like that, rather than trying to learn all of the techniques under the sun and starting to confuse them together, or using sort of guessing techniques, anything like that. Much better to know a few things well than to try and learn lots and spread yourself too thin. And to be honest, even when you're analyzing language, now of course you need to have technical language in there, but you might come across some writing. It's got interesting words in it you want to analyze, but you are not sure what technique is being used. And if that's the case, you can write about the phrase. You can say the author uses the phrase and then whatever it is. And it's much better to do that than to try and guess a technique if you're not used. Of course, if you're not sure, of course, you need some technical language within the exam. Of course you do, but it's better to have less technical language and use it correct than to just be throwing out terminology. Equally, it's the analysing of the language which will get you the best points. And that's in two ways. It's the analysing, so going into depth on a few things is often better. It's better to have a few phrases in real depth than trying to list everything under the sun. But equally, it's better to analyze simplistic language sophisticatedly than to highlight sophisticated language but not truly understand it. It's something I will always say in terms of language, in terms of the quotations you focus on, to go for the low hanging fruit. And so, what do I mean by that, to go for the low hanging fruit? I mean to go for the phrases you are confident in the understanding of. To go for language you are confident you understand. It's normal if you're coming to this exam as a second language student, which many of you are. It's normal to come across phrases you are not confident in the meaning of. Unless you have a very high level of English, this is likely to happen occasionally. And so just don't quote those phrases. It's much better to be analyzing simplistic language, but to be able to go into depth because you really understand it, than to pick up very sophisticated language but not being confident of a meaning. With that being said, we're just going to look at a few techniques briefly, just as a general guide. As I say, this is really, in this class, it's just scratching the surface of some of this. But at the same time, if you knew all the techniques we mentioned here and were confident with them, you would be in a more than strong enough position for this exam. So the first technique I'm going to mention is a metaphor. And these early techniques, they come under the banner of figurative language. So figurative language is the opposite of literal language. So literal language is just saying what something is. Figurative language, or saying something that is real. Literal language is figurative language, is saying things which perhaps aren't real, comparisons which aren't exactly true, but which the reader can understand and place it together. By its nature, figurative language, it will be a little bit more descriptive, a bit more poetic along the way than literal language often is. We've got an example of a metaphor here. And a metaphor is literally, a metaphor is a word or a phrase is applied to an object or action which is not literally true. So, say for example, here it says the sea was a washing machine. Of course, anyone reading this knows the sea isn't literally a washing machine. It's not designed to wash your clothes, but you can understand from it how the sea is incredibly turbulent, how it's pushing everything around, it's tossing and turning, how you'd be sort of washed clean if you entered it, but you would have no control. One can imagine these wild currents swirling round as well. So that's what a metaphor does. It doesn't literally say something, but you can infer from it what is being meant. And then we got another example here. We got a simile. We've got a simile, and a simile, to be honest, a simile is a type of metaphor. We think of them as separate techniques, but really all similes are metaphors, even though all metaphors aren't similes. And so similes are a comparison in the form of a metaphor, but using the words like or as. We've got here the wind was as sharp as knives. Equally, we could say the wind was like a knife. Both of these would be a simile. And just as before, it's not literal. You're not. Doesn't mean you go outside and you're gonna die. It's just saying, but the wind is extremely piercing. It's fierce and it's strong. One can imagine you could go outside in a huge coat, and yet it's going to cut through. It's going to freeze you to the bone. So again, it's using that language around it. If you were analysing the text, you could say, for example, we author uses the simile as sharp as knife to make clear to the reader how fierce and cutting the wind is. One can imagine it biting through the clothes of any passers by. So using the language around it, explaining this is what the author is trying to say in this case. Okay. Now, the next technique we're going to look at is hyperbole. It's a hard word to pronounce. It's a hard word to remember actually, but basically it means exaggeration, making something bigger than it actually is. In fact, our last one we just saw is an example of hyperbole. The wind is as sharp as knives. It's not literally as sharp as knives. Knives, if it was literally as sharp as knives, it would be death to go outside. So it's clearly an exaggeration, making something bigger than it is. And to be clear, if you've got the term hyperbole, brilliant. But if you can only think of a term exaggeration in the exam, use it. That's absolutely fine as well. It can still probably get you into the third of the four levels of marks, get into a comfortable passing grade. And so we've got another example of hyperbole here. The boy is a devil. I can't stand having him in my class. This sort of thing probably some of you as trainee teachers might have said when feeling very exacerbated after a day, maybe working as a teaching assistant, if that's what some of you do. And again, as we'll see here, it's hyperbole, it's exaggeration, but it is also a metaphor. The boy's not literally the reincarnation of evil, so it's metaphorical too. And this will often be the case in the exam, but a sentence can be more than one technique together. Just because it's one doesn't discount it from being another. Sometimes there's more than one technique in play at the same time, and you can incorporate that in your answer. But yeah, exactly. In this case, a reader is going to understand, or if it was a listener of it, as you saying, they're going to understand, but it's a very naughty boy. They're not going to think they are the incarceration of evil itself. It seems rather unlikely, but it makes very clear, isn't it, how difficult they're making a life. Maybe they're acting quite malevolently, hitting other children, throwing people around, disrupting the class in whatever way is possible. And I would say exaggeration or hyperbole, really important technique this, because basically I would say unless it's a very factual piece of writing, most authors who are doing more trying to tell a story will use hyperbole because it's just going to make the story more interesting. It makes it more dramatic. Like if we're telling a story as well, exaggerating things, making them bigger, it makes it much more interesting to listen to. Now, another technique here which does come up but I'd be a little bit careful with is personification. So we can see with personification, it's got person in a name. That's because it's given an object or a non-living thing human feelings or characteristics. So if it said like the branch waved at her, so the branch of a tree beckoning her through. Well, of course, the tree doesn't wave at people, so it's personifying the tree. It's making it come alive. It makes it a character within the story of it. It's non-fiction within the type of writer, and in that way, it makes it possible for a reader maybe to empathize or to understand more. It can add a sense of mystery and intrigue, bring non-living characters to life. Welcome, Bahirafan, as well. And so, as I say, when I say be careful with this, it's because from my experience as a private tutor, I find second language people really struggle with this. I often see people misuse it. And so I would only say something is personification if you're absolutely sure. Equally, well, it comes up, it happens, of course, in non-fiction writing, which is the sources you'll get in the exam. It's not as common. Now, when it can be really, really useful is when you're doing your own writing, and there's particularly if you do the descriptive writing 6B, personifying sort of the weather, personifying the world around can be a real way to bring it to life. Now, if we're going to be very technical at the top levels of the mark scheme, actually when you're personifying weather, giving it to give a mood of give it emotions, this is actually prophetic fallacy, which is a form of personification. But unless you're really, really confident, I would not overly worry about that. That's not something you need to differentiate unless you're looking to get extremely sophisticated. It's not something to worry about too much at a passing level. Well, a much, much easier technique to spot is repetition. And repetition, again, it's easier to remember the term as well because what is repetition? It's repeating. It could be repeating a single word in a short period of time. So we've got the example here: the waves crashed and crashed into the rocks. And here it's just sort of, it's actually onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word that sounds like an action. It's a very hard word to spell, but you can imagine crash, crash. It's sort of helping the reader almost have a sensory reaction, helping them hear the story in this case, the repetition of it, showing a action going on and on again. Now, in this case, in an individual sentence, it can be more simplistic to spot, but maybe a little bit more difficult to analyze. There's less you can say about it. However, when it comes to a text as a whole, you may have a repetition of a phrase multiple times within a text. It could even be a couple of times and you could still point it out, but you could have an idea that is gone back to more than once. So actually, the source A in the exam we started looking at, for question 2, we're going to continue in today, but George Orwell's source is a classic example of this. But as an idea, he repeats one thing, but he did not want to shoot the elephant. I did not, which changes to I had to shoot the elephant. But equally, the repetition of the crowd would laugh at me, the ridicule of a crowd, the crowd would laugh at me. So the repetition of this phrase, of this idea, shows how fixated Orwell was on a fear of ridicule, a fear of being laughed at, and how this was motivating him to eventually change his opinion. And even though he didn't want to shoot the elephant, overall doing it. So in this case, it's a really useful technique. When repetition is in the course of a text as a whole, as a repetition of a phrase, it's more of a structural technique than anything else, but it can be really, really useful in questions 4 and question 5. Equally, again, it's something you could potentially use in a question 6. A repetition of a phrase at the beginning and the end can help you to create a circular structure being a story where the start and finish linked together, which is something the examiner likes a lot. All right, and so moving on from that, we're going to move on a couple of general terms. And this first one I would say is a really important term, both in analyzing language, but also particularly again if you do 6B in writing your own answer. This is sensory detail. And sensory detail is basically writing that appeals to a reader's senses. not just what they can see, which is very common, but equally imagining what they could touch, the smell being described, things you can hear, potentially things you could taste. We've got here the slimy, gooey skin of the reptile and has a foul stench of rotten flesh. So it's things slimy and gooey is both words you can visualize, you can see, but also you can think of a touch, that horrible slimy texture as well. So it plays to the two areas there. And equally, we've got to smell the foul stench of rotten flesh. We've got lots of language here which is applying to these areas, and all of this can help bring writing to life because it brings the reader into the action. It helps them imagine things. It helps them really feel as if they are inside the story. So one to look out for. It certainly happens in writing in part A, something to look out for. But equally, particularly if you do question 6B, when you're doing a descriptive piece of writing, sensory language can be the key to a strong mark. Now, the next thing is a bit more general term, but it's a useful term to know, which is emotive language. And this, in non-fiction writing, is something to really look out for because sometimes it can tell us a bit on what the writer's intending to do. Are they trying to persuade us about something? So it's language to try and invoke an emotional reaction. Often it'll be sympathy. Often it'll be something like anger. These are two different, I would say, very common types of emotive techniques a writer would go for. So we've got an example. We've got whatever they may have done to see helpless children trapped behind bars can only invoke a sadness or over how society has let them down. So we've got words in here like helpless, trapped, sadness, let down, all of these ideas. So to try and get emotional sympathy, one would assume a piece of writing here would be about incarceration of people who are technically still children under 18, and it's trying to get the reader to feel empathy with the people in the cell, so using lots of emotive language there. But equally, it would be emotive language if you said something like it's disgusting and despicable, but we try to sympathize with the violent offenders who have done harm to society, who have selfishly focused on themselves at the detriment of those around. Again, it's talking about a similar area, but this time trying to make the reader angry, trying to get them to feel that the incarceration is justified. All right. Now, I would mention it's not actually on the sheet here. It could be on the sheet, but it's not. But sometimes you won't get all these emotive, you won't get all these figurative techniques, and then you can maybe focus on the opposite, which is factual language. If that's language with lots of just things which happen, things as they are, where the author is trying to inform as opposed to persuade, this still would come under language techniques. The lack of emotion, the lack of something is still something you can talk about. You can talk about the factual language, maybe statistics being used as well. And these will be areas you can look up for if a text is very much in the other direction, if it's much more matter of fact. Now, another technique definitely worth questioning, rhetorical questions. And rhetorical question is a question that doesn't need answering. Often it's intended to evoke a planned response, again, to persuade a reader of something. So we've got an example here. Given all of the evidence out there showing its negative effect on childhood obesity, how can it not be right to put a tax on sugar? So this is shaped like a question, but it's basically saying it's not right. It's not really a question. It's just saying we need to put a tax on sugar. So it's an idea in the form of a question, and often this will be used in persuasive writing. Potentially, one of the sources is a speech. Speech writers love using this as well. This is a good technique again. Question 6, especially question 6A in this. If you're writing an article, it can be really useful. If you are writing a speech, if that's what's come up, it could be really useful as well along the way. So it's definitely something to keep an eye for. Also, it's quite easy to spot in text. It can be quite simplistic to spot. And normally, if you have questions in an article. By its very nature, it's not a conversation. So the question is almost definitely going to be rhetorical. I realise I don't know my own document because we've got the information on a statistic. Here it's a statistic really rather than factual language. Factual language can just be some talking about things that happened. It would be that, I assume, rather than 8% of the UK population are vegan hats. It will be that 8% of the UK population is not now vegan. And yeah, as mentioned already, factual language is all about informing the reader. Again, maybe trying to persuade them as well, but persuading them through information. Okay, now just to say as well, so beyond sort of looking at these techniques, as I've already mentioned, you can analyze words in the exam. So if you know the difference between adjectives, adverbs, things like this, these are areas you can focus on. And I often find this is something that actually my second language students are better at than my first language GCSE students. The fact you maybe have learned English in a more technical nature means that sometimes it's easier to differentiate types of words. Equally, if you focus maybe on something to do with tenses or grammar, you may be able to spot things which your average native speaker has never actually bothered learning. Now, often when we're focusing on individual words, it will be when you analyze as a phrase as a whole, then to zoom in on an individual word within it, say like the adjective, whatever it is, shows that, and then sort of explaining a little bit further using synonyms for the adjective or the adverb and areas like that, and doing the same. But it's something you should aim to do when you're analyzing language. Focus on a phrase as a whole, then zoom in on a word, an interesting word within it, which you understand, to go into further detail. So we've got a little bit of information with verbs and adverbs here. Verbs being largely doing words like played around, sang. Now words for altering sentences. Adverbs, what does what it suggests. You add it to a verb because it's played rapidly, ran quietly, sung majestically. Although there's words in between, the adverb relates to the verb. And as you can see here, adverbs are probably the easiest words to spot because the vast majority of adverbs end with ly. It's just an adjective like quiet with ly on. Rapid is an adjective, rapidly an adverb. Quiet is an adjective, quietly an adverb. Majestical is an adjective, majestically an adverb. So it's just with ly on the end. Now, not every single adverb has ly, but the vast majority do. Not every single word that ends in ly is an adverb, but the vast majority is. But if it's ends in ly, it seems to link towards a verb, it's going to be an adverb. All right. And then here we've also got just a little example with adjectives. Just one thing to say with adjectives. Adjectives are generally words that describe a noun. You can have a lot of adjectives listed together. So like the poor, young, withered girl. So you've got 3 adjectives back to back. And so they're generally going to be describing a noun. So these are things I would say, if you're not confident, try to be at least on adjectives and adverbs that you can recognize, because they're the words you can generally analyze the most, and brush up on them if you're not sure. But the key is always the depth you can go into the analysis. Just listing all the words from a text saying this is an adjective, this is an adverb, without analyzing them, without going into depth, it's not going to get you so far from a marks perspective. So it's important to go beyond that. Now, this is more to do with question 4 and 5 than question 3, but beyond techniques and types of words, you can also focus on a style of a writer. So, if you can explain why a writer has written in a certain way, there's marks to gain here. So, one area for this is the tone of a piece. And by tone, we're sort of talking about the mood of a piece. And the great thing about tone is there's not really technical words you need for it. Try to talk about tone in the most sophisticated way possible, but you can really throw any adjective in front of tone. So If a piece of writing, if it's very sad, you could say it has a melancholic tone. If it's very happy, you could say it's got an upbeat tone or a joyous tone. If a writer's trying to be funny, you could say it's got a humorous tone to it as well. If it's full of questions, you could say it's got an inquisitive tone. So there's many different words you can throw in front, but particularly when you go for question 4, it's an area it's definitely worth trying to mention because, as I say, you don't have to be too technical. It's just how do you feel reading it? Well, the tone is probably going to be what's causing you to feel how you do. So then you can use your own experience to write about the tone. Now, other things you can potentially talk about, and again, these are often areas second language students feel more comfortable in, is a piece of writing. Is it in the present tense or is it in the past tense? And how does this affect things? Equally, if there's a lot of continuous verbs, ing, what is it showing a movement of? Is this something you can potentially focus on as well? Is it potentially in the present but with a flashback to something in the past? This is something you can do as well. And equally, is it written in a first person? So I do this, I do that. Is it written in a third, like he, she did this? Or is it directly addressing an audience? You should do this. You need to do this. It might have commands from a more technical perspective, imperatives, which is command language, things like get up, sit down. These are imperatives. So it could have things like this. And why is that? Probably if you're using direct address, you're trying to persuade the audience, you're trying to talk directly to the audience, you're trying to make the reader feel as if they are being spoken to one, but the article is aimed, or the speech is aimed directly about this. So these sort of areas, they can tell us a lot about the intention of the author. One other thing I want to mention, we're going to see a lot when we look at question 4 next week, is the blurb. So the blurb is not really a technique, but it's the information at the top of a text. And the blurb tells us a lot. It's going to tell us who is writing. Are they an author? Are they giving a speech? Is it a private diary? Is it a letter? What sort of writing is? And that's going to equally, it's going to tell us when are they writing. Very, very important too. The more modern text, normally source A will be more modern, but going to be influenced by a more liberal modern society. Source B will likely be from the 19th century. It was a more conservative society, and that might have an influence on it. But equally, who is the audience? Again, if you're giving a speech to a crowd, you're going to try and do different than if you're writing a private diary. So who are they writing to? And you can even think about things like whether the author is male or female. What is that position in society? Anything like this as well. This is all going to tell us a lot about the context, about what is influencing the writer, but also what their intention is. So something particularly, as I say, as we get to questions 4 and 5, it is something you can talk about. Just seeing we got a question from Mel. So Mel said, can you use a neutral tone? Sometimes I do not find any specific tone, especially from articles in magazines or newspapers. Exactly. It's a really good point, that Mel. And it's particularly if writing is maybe more academic in nature, if it's maybe more formal in its style, maybe it's focusing more on statistical information and expert opinion as opposed to being for with more emotional language or hyperbolic language or anything like that. And yet, absolutely, if there's not a clear lack of tone, you could call it a neutral tone, and you're still discussing tone, even if a neutral tone saying there is a lack of maybe a specific agenda or specific emotion. Now, sometimes writing, well, we discussed writing being emotive earlier. Sometimes the writing's not at all emotive, and that may be, but the writing has a neutral tone to it. So yeah, absolutely, that's something you could do. You could do as well. Okay. We're going to move on now and have a look at the specific of question number 3. Now, question number 3, we're gonna skip a page just to show. Well, actually, sorry, the question's at the bottom here and at the top. So we've got, you now need to refer to only to source A from lines 26 to 35. So question 3 of the A start exam will always only focus on one of the sources, always, and it's always just basically going to focus on a paragraph. So we'll focus on a small amount of one source, and in a way that will make it easier because you sort of kept to an easier area. It's easier to maybe find quotations for that region. You know where to look. And the question will always say, how does the writer use language to describe something? So in this case, how does the writer use language to describe the crowd of people? So in this case, the crowd of people, it could be, but it'll be to describe something. It's always a 12-mark question as well. Now, we're going to look at a few sort of general points to look at with this, and then we'll come back and look at the text itself. But this question, as mentioned, is marked using AO2, which is to explain, comment on, and analyze how the writers use language and structure to achieve effects and influence readers, using relevant subject terminology to support their views. The question assesses language, i.e., words, phrases, language features, language techniques, sentence forms. I would say, although AO2 says structure in it, because you're focused on one paragraph, structure tends to be about the text as a whole and the flow. And you'll see particularly it talks about language underneath. So I think structure, it is allowed to be talked about, but it would be difficult to. It's not something I really think of as a question 3 thing, more when looking at question 4, the text as a whole, and maybe question 5. Now, important tips for this question. Make sure you only focus on language. Just as question 2 has nothing to do with language, this question is entirely to do with language. So make sure you focus on language. And this might seem obvious, but take examples from the advised lines. Focus on those lines. Make sure you're taking quotations from it. Now, again, what I said earlier, always take the low hanging fruit in this question. So what that means, focus on the techniques or the words you understand, the phrases you understand. In fact, it's more important you understand the phrase than you know the techniques. You might see something as a simile because it uses like or as, but you don't understand it. Unfortunately, then it's better to avoid it because it will come apparent to the examiner if you really don't know what you're saying. Just before I carry on, Sandia has asked, where can we find this presentation in website? I'm really sorry. I've been asked this question a few times, and I always have to ask the other students in the class if someone can show, because I think I've got a bit of a goldfish memory with this one. I know it's there, but I have trouble finding it. If anyone else knows the answer to this, would it be all right to put it in the messages, Pasadia? If not, what I will do at the end of this class, I will have a hunt, but I'll leave it for now, so it's not just a case of people watching me hunting through for a page. But if anyone can help with this, I'll be greatly appreciative. Coming on from this, we've got in terms of quality is much more important than quantity. So I mentioned this before. You're not trying to find all the language techniques. You could get a paragraph which has 20 language techniques. You're not possibly going to be able to talk about 20 paragraph techniques in depth in the time available. And 3 well-developed points, 3 paragraphs will be more than enough. In some cases, you might only have time for 2 paragraphs. And within a paragraph, you might just mention one phrase and zoom in. It's possible you'll corroborate it with something else which you don't go into in as much depth. It could literally be sort of 3 phrases you dive into in depth within your answer along the way. All right, now make sure you are focused on what it focuses on, because there might be language to do with more than one area, but in in this case, I um, in this case, what I would say is make sure, for example, this question is focused on the crowd. Make sure that you are talking about the crowd at all times. So don't use your analysis to particularly talk about the crowd. It may be a quotation to do with Orwell, but you want to look at him in relation to the crowd. And as mentioned already, adverbs really easy thing to spot and focus on, as they nearly always end ly. Just to say as well, so Chiefus, sorry, I see your comment how I have the exam tomorrow. I have sent my second paper to be marked still. I didn't get the feedback. Okay, all I can say for that is I'm sorry. I should be clear. I know this is a little bit passing the buck or taking the blame away from me. I'm not a direct employee of A Star, although I do the group classes for them and I'm an expert on this exam. I've tutored for this exam. I am only paid for the classes. I'm not an employee outside, if that makes sense. So I don't have any input or say into the works of head office, but I know how frustrating that must be. I'm not sure how long ago you sent it off, but I'm very sorry it hasn't got back to you, and especially because it's night. I know the head office is shut now. You could always try phoning first thing tomorrow if your exam's not too early, but even then, I think unless it's got lost on its way through to you, it's unlikely they'd be able to get you anything in a time available. So yeah, no, I'm sorry that's happened to you, but regardless, if you've done all the work, if you've got everything good, I really hope it can go well tomorrow. So yeah, best of luck for that. And as I always say to anyone who's got that test coming up in the nicest possible way, I hope not to see you back in class because I really, really hope that you pass them. But the slight setback in this way, not getting this back, won't affect you at all in terms of your confidence for the exam itself. All right. Now carrying on, we've got basically just to say, um, as mentioned already, much better to say phrase than to guess a language technique. Now, in terms of your answer for question 3, I think it can be good to have an introductory sentence. So this is true throughout questions 2, 3, 4, 5, because it makes the examiner, it makes your answer seem sort of planned out. It gives it a flow. So if you said, for example, throughout the passage, Orwell uses metaphorical language to show the size and emotion of the crowd, and then jump into the first. It makes it feel like it all links together. And equally, you should use connectors and joining words between sentences. So when you move on to a second technique, you could say the attitude of the crowd is further shown through, or furthermore, Orwell does this to show that. So linking your ideas together. And when you come to the end of your answer, maybe having a sentence that links it together. So all of this combines to create an image of a crowd as and giving a detail about that as well. All right. Now, just to say as well, we've been talking about length for questions. We've got about 12 marks here, so you want to be looking to get off this question in 15 minutes. Again, this is something to practice when you're practicing for the exam because timing can be so challenging. But I'd say because it's a small amount of writing, it's one of the more achievable ones from an early stage. It probably won't take quite as much work to get there as maybe some of the others. Okay, but we're going to look at the paragraph just quickly for this question. So we've got, but at the moment, I glanced around at the crowd that have followed me. It was an immense crowd, 2,000 at the least, and growing every minute. So we've got hyperbolic language about the size, about how big, the adjective immense, and how huge it is. I looked at the sea of faces above the garish close. So garish talking about sort of a colourful nature, sea of faces, we've got a metaphor. Faces all happy and excited over this bit of fun. Well, here really, this isn't a technique we've mentioned. We've got the two adjectives which show the simplicity of a crowd, but equally, this bit of fun, you can mention it as irony, but it's not fun at all for Orwell. For the crowd, it might be enjoyable, but for Orwell, it's a horrific moment. It's a violent moment. It's a moment where he's not in control. all certain that the elephant was going to be shot. They were watching me as they would watch a conjurer about to perform a trick. So we have got a simile here comparing, or the crowd see him as a magician. They are ready to watch the show. And suddenly I realized that I should have to shoot the elephant after all. But people expected of me, and I had got to do it. So again, we've got Aria's language here showing the influence of the crowd. Here I was, the white man with his gun, seemingly the leading actor of a piece, but in reality I was only a puppet pushed to and fro by the will of those faces behind. So again, we've got metaphorical language here, showing that the crowd in this metaphor are the puppet masters. They are the ones leading, but all well for the colour of his skin. The white man would be expected, and his position as policeman would be expected to be dominating his position, but it's the crowd who are dominating me. So come all that way, rifle in hand, with 2,000 people marching at my heels, and then to trail feebly away, having done nothing. No, that was impossible. The crowd would laugh at me. So there's interesting language there, but it's focusing a little bit more on Orwell than the crowd. So it might be best to avoid it. So Chief, I'm going to come to your questions at the end when I've come through this, just because that'll be time for general. But remind me at the end if I seem like I'm going to finish without doing it, because I know you've got the exam tomorrow. So yeah, of course I want to help you with these as well. But I'm going to finish going through the question 3, and then for general questions we'll come to those afterwards. Okay, so we're going to look at the indicative standard for this. Now I need to warn. Remember, I have mentioned before, I want to make this very clear because I'm confused. Indicative standard is not a full answer. These are not a full model answer. It's as if it's an extract from a model answer which shows the style of writing at each levels. These indicative standards on this particular question are very small. In the exam, although quality is more important than quantity, you do need to write more than this. So we've got here level 4. This is the top level of the mark scheme. Remember, levels and grades aren't the same thing. Level 4 is sort of grades 8 to 9. This is the top level. I'm not expecting anyone to be up here. If this seems easy to you and you just need a pass, go and take the exam already. But it's good to understand what the examiner is using for. And at the top level, it's all about analysing the effects of a writer's choice of language, selecting a judicious range of textual details. Being judicious means quoting only what you need and nothing more, making sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. So only at the top level do you need really the very sophisticated language techniques and really understanding things which maybe not everyone's going to get. So we've just got a part, as I say, a small part. This is not a whole answer. It's a small part of an answer. And it says, the writer uses the metaphor sea of faces to describe how the crowd of people has come together to form one single mass. Each of the faces is indistinguishable from one another. So notice how the description is almost describing what a sea is like. You've got a single body of water. The crowds are a single mass. You can't tell particles of water apart. You can't tell the crowd apart. They are indistinguishable. The image of the sea suggests they have swept in behind him, almost like the tide, and are a powerful and irresistible force of nature, which he cannot withstand. So notice all of this language, sophisticated language, but linked to the idea of a sea. They've zoomed in on the word the sea, and all of this language really building it up, really going into depth about it, really going into depth about the sea. Or right, and you'll notice here it's almost as if they're expanding upon the metaphor. It's like they've started with a metaphor, and in their analysis of it, they are going beyond it here. Now, obviously that's the top level, so don't be too concerned if the style of writing is a bit more sophisticated if you don't have that language. If you do, brilliant. But the key to getting a pass, the key for aiming for level 3 grades 5 to 10 is keeping things clear and keeping things relevant. So explaining clearly the effects of the writer's choice of language. It doesn't have to be too sophisticated, but it's got to show it clear. It's got to be obvious to the examiner that you understand, which is why it's much better to focus on simpler phrases and explain them clearly rather than choosing things you don't fully understand. And as long as it's relevant, your quotations, then that's fine, but only quote what you need and nothing more, just like with judicious. Equally, making clear and accurate use of subject terminology. So yes, the terminology has to be that, but it doesn't have to be the fanciest terminology. It just needs to be clear and accurate. If you can't remember hyperbole, it's fine to say exaggeration. So we got here, the writer uses the metaphor sea of faces to describe how a number of individual people faces have come together into one massive group. So it's a little bit more basic. The language here hasn't really linked it, gone further with the sea idea of this case, but it has understood the metaphor. It's clearly understood. And the idea of the sea suggests the huge size of the crowd and that they are moving together as one, like waves in the ocean. So again, it has tried to link it to the crowd, but it's a little bit more simplistic, just saying big, huge, large, these sort of waves. It has linked to the sea like waves in the ocean. Sea moves in waves, a crowd can move in waves too, but it hasn't got the depth or sophistication of the higher level. I realise I've repeated this a few times, but just to say one more time again, don't look at these as an example of size. You need to write more than this. I only repeat this so many times because I normally repeat it a few times, but I've had people sometimes get confused by this, and it is very important you understand this is shown the style of writing. It's not meant to be a full sample answer. Okay, so we're just going to move on quickly to level 2. Sorry, I think someone's put that hand up. Go for it, Sanjay.
So can you show the previous slide?
Yeah, no problem, no problem. I'll put it up if you want to. I am going to have a hunt. I know no one's helped with, or sorry, no one's helped. That sounds like I'm putting a blame on people. No one's known where to get um the link to the articles for. I'm gonna have a look for you at the end as well. I just don't want to do it during the class because it's gonna be everyone watching me search on the internet for a few minutes. So yeah, bear with me at the end. If you stay in when everyone's leaving, I'll see if I can do that for you.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. So my question is here. The answer is starting with. No, I want to have the previous slide.
oh yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, I thought you were just getting a copy. No problem. Yeah.
So here the answer is starting with the writer uses the metaphor. So so apart from that, can we use any other words
So
apart
you
from the using the word writer uses?
So you could mention the writer's name. You could use instead of uses. You could maybe use employs. I would say again, I would have a sentence before this in a true answer. This is just an extract from it. Like the one I showed on the slide earlier on, where it says, for example, throughout the passage, Orwell uses potentially metaphorical language to describe the crowd. And then rather than he uses the metaphor, you could say, for example, he metaphorically describes using the adverb form, and it can sound more sophisticated. Uses is a good term, but just by using maybe subtle changes of that along the way. So yes, look, for example, here where it's got the same at the level 4 here, but then on the second example it says like the image of the sea suggests. You could say the writer creates an image of this through a metaphor. So you could word it around different ways, but it is at the same time the writer uses the and saying something is a clear sentence structure. So although you don't want to use exactly the same thing again and again, it is a good framework to use. Oh, Bahirafan, you're an absolute star, by the way. Bahirafan's just put in the chat where you can get the link to all of um all of the presentations. But is that okay, Sanjay? Or any other question?
So when starting every answer, we should start with the word the writer uses or with the writer name. Is it compulsory?
No, so again, it's one of the possible ways. So you've heard me suggest some different ways you can do it. It's a good framework for when you are talking about the writer, but try to mix up sentence starts. You could say the writer uses, and then you could say later on he metaphorically describes, or furthermore he employs the. So using different but similar sentence structures throughout.
And can we use that word repeatedly? Like the writer uses for this, the writer used this sentence for that. Can we use that repeatedly?
So again, I would recommend trying to use slightly different versions of it along the way. So, because just if you write exactly the same words again and again, it's going to look um, quite formulaic. The most important thing, though, is that you employ connectors. So that when you focus on a second technique, you'd say sort of furthermore or later on or following this, but it flows as one coherent piece of writing. As if you just write the writer uses the metaphor and then later on write the writer uses the simile and then later on write the writer uses personification, it's going to read like many separate answers. So having these connector words is really, really important.
How we can conclude that?
So,
How we can conclude
so
our
if
answer?
you look, so kind of Bahirafan shared the presentation, and so I'm just gonna flick up. But if you have a look on the earlier pages, there was a slide we went through earlier today when I gave an example of an introductory sentence and a conclusionary sentence for this. So it's on page, I think it's on page 14. I'm not going to go through them again now because we went through them earlier. But if you go to page 14 on the presentation, but you have the link to now, you can find an example of an introductory and a conclusionary sentence.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. So just to say, we got the level 2 in here as well. And level 2 is just a partial success of level 3. You can pass with a top level 2, but you'll see the language is a little bit more basic. So it's the writer uses lots of different language features to describe the customer. Notice this isn't very specific. This is a sentence I think is a poor sentence, in fact, because it doesn't tell us anything. Every single writer ever uses lots of different language features. Now, if it says the writer uses figurative language to bring alive a crowd, it would be specific to the text, so it would be good. But this sentence tells us nothing. And it says, he says they are a sea of faces. So again, a simplistic, short sentence. This is a metaphor, so it's true, but it doesn't flow, and makes the reader think that the crowd was as big as the sea, with so many people that he cannot count them. So quite simplistic language, just shows it's big as the sea, repeating the wording. So it does, I think the level 2, it understands the phrase, it's got some good ideas in it, but it's not up to the level to score high. So we got here as well, we've got level 1 in the document if you want to have a look at what you don't want to do. There's also many of the different language techniques which you could focus on here. So I'd advise all of you to potentially have a look at these later on, and maybe have a go at writing your own full question 3. So potentially a 3-paragraph answer using the ideas we've discussed today. Now, just before I finish, we don't have much time for questions, but I know Chifa had a couple already, so I want to answer both of these. If anything has an urgent question, feel free to ask. But you should, if not, you should be able to find it that. I think it might be, by the way, Sandia. It may be, but you need to scroll down. I'm sorry because I'm not logged in on my computer to the A-Star site. I'm unable to double check it myself. It may just be a case of scrolling down, and you'll be able to find them. But I want to come to Chifa's questions. Is it, how many minutes do we need to allocate for each questions? And then you've asked specifically for 4 and 5. So my general advice I would say is almost to round up to the nearest 5 minutes. So question 1, 5 minutes, question 2, 10 minutes, question 3, 15 minutes, question 4, 20 minutes, question 5, 25 minutes. And then you've got question 6, I'd say about 45 minutes, and that will still leave you an additional 10 minutes of reading time. The time on other questions may involve going back and forth with sources too. Now, in terms of the order of the exam, it may be that you if you the order of the exam, it may be worth watching the final lecture of the series, watching a recording of that Suchi, because I talk a little bit about a recommendation, maybe to do it in a different order and why, and a bit of a summary of the length of questions. But we'll leave it there for tonight. Jing, thanks for the suggestion. If you're really having trouble finding the links, Andy, it can be a way to go, because I might be able to send you an email with the copies directly if you're still unable to find it as well. But yeah, best of luck, Suchi, for tomorrow. For the rest of you, we'll be back next Thursday. So as I said, next week we're going to have 2 classes, one on Thursday, one on Friday. So I think you've slightly misunderstood. I don't have the email. I'm not from the exams team with a link. If you send an email to the exams team, I know I send out group classes email, but I only have access to do that. So if you send an email to the exams team, they can send it out to you as well. I'm sorry, but I don't have the document with all of them myself. As Jing says, you can request it online. So if you send an email to exams, I believe this is off the top of my head, but I think it's the correct address.
Sorry, I did not get. What should I request from them?
So the documents that you wish to receive, if you request it from them, and then they hopefully have got a link there they can do, or at least can give you even more specific guidance if you're not able to find them. But yeah, no, I wish you the best of luck and hope you are able to locate them, as I'm sure they will help you with everything. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Actually, I got the exam guidance I have received. Apart from that, what are the guidance do I need to request from them?
Sorry, it's my mistake. I must admit I wasn't reading the names in the conversation, so I must apologize for the confusion to you. I was confusing with the question from Sandy, which is what Jin had responded to, and then didn't realize it was you who had sent the email afterwards. I apologize, Suchifra. But in terms of information for your exam tomorrow, just a thing I was saying to you, if you go onto the A-Star site, just if you have a look at the document for the final class, I talk a little bit about exam order and give a bit of a summary in terms of time on each question as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome, and best of luck. And thanks a lot to everyone. I hope you all have a great night. Hi, Kate. Go for it quickly, Sadia, but I really do have to go in a second, but feel free.
So can I present my screen so that anyone can help me how to go through the presentations?
I mean, I think the easiest thing, honestly, if you just drop an email, I've put the email in the exams at astarequivalency.com.
Sorry, they're not responding to my mails. I tried multiple times.
multiple times. It seems it's tricky because if you share on your screen, I'm not going to be able to move the screen regardless, and as I'm not sure exactly where to put it, I'm not sure. Plus, I don't really with this form have the options for someone else to share. What I will do, I will try and find I will try and find a very clear link to it for next week, so that if you've not been able to access it, if you try to contact exams and they don't do it for you, they are able to help you then. But I hope that's okay, and I hope either the worst case scenario, you just stay on at the end next week, and I'll find a way to show you how, or I'll try to have it ready to share with you at the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no problem at all. No problem. All right, thanks a lot, everyone. Hope you all have a good night, and I will see you next Thursday. Okay, bye bye.